Karen is a human resources leader with more than 20 years of executive and leadership experience in human capital, including global human resource management, business strategy, communications, leadership coaching, and organizational development. She's currently the president and executive coach for TAP Executive Coaching, a division of the Alice Project. So today, Karen will be discussing a range of topics of women in leadership, including the opportunities and costs for women in leadership roles, when being a woman matters and when it doesn't, and what to do next and beyond. So as you listen to Karen's presentation over the next 30 minutes or so, just really start thinking about some questions you might have for her. We'll have a short Q&A at the very end of the presentation. So really just kind of think about what she's saying, and approach this webinar as just kind of a conversation between all of us. And we're really looking forward. It's going to be an exciting topic. And Karen, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. Welcome.
Well, hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. I am super excited to join you today in your discussion around women in leadership. And when Kate reached out to me and a couple other folks from 21st Century Leaders, I jumped at the chance. So I am very, very committed to this topic and really started my practice working exclusively with women leaders. And so I've morphed a little bit since that time, 3 years or so ago. But I remain committed to it and involved in the community that really focuses on women in leadership. So what I'm hoping today is a discussion and not a lecture. I remember being in school 100 years ago, and the last thing I wanted to do was spend my evenings in a lecture. So I'm hoping that we'll just have a chance to really talk. And I'm going to share my perspective. I encourage you to ask questions. There may be some things that you hear today that maybe challenge you a little bit around conventional thinking on some topics. So do take plenty of notes and be open. What I'm sharing with you is really just my perspective. You will find different perspectives across the gamut, but I'm hoping that you might find something that will be of use to you in our time together today. So the one caveat to that will be, I'm going to share a little snippet, a video snippet that has to do with the pay gap. You've heard lots of discussion around that. And the question, or what I would say to you around questions related to compensation and pay, just remember that specific questions about compensation may be difficult to answer just because there's so much variety between organizations, but you know, I'm putting it out there just as something to consider. Here's the other thing I want you to remember as you listen to me talk. My career has been full of amazing successes and an equal number of challenges. Whether you see me on TV or the stage, or you hear me in a webinar like this, or see me in the grocery store, just know that every leader is also a real person. So what I hope is that if we have an opportunity to connect, or you see me out somewhere, that you'll just say hi. And really, my career experience is an open book. If there's something you can learn from me, I'm delighted to share with you. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So here's what we're going to try to tackle today, as Kate mentioned. I'm going to talk real briefly about some of the reasons why I think it's great to be a woman in business today. And I'm going to share with you a little nugget that I gleaned from a survey that I did in 2014. It was a women's skill development survey, and it was just a very interesting response. It wasn't what I was expecting, and I think it might surprise you as well, around what women want to be doing as it relates to leadership. Then I'm going to talk for a second about what it takes to get to leadership, and I've kind of categorized it into 4 buckets, and I hope in the scope of the time that we have together today that this will give you at least a snapshot of some of the things that are important. And I'm also going to touch on when being a woman matters and when it doesn't. And then I'm going to talk to you about what to do next and beyond. And again, this is my perspective. So, you know, pick a piece or two that really resonates with you, and let's go from there. All right. So let me talk to you about this idea that it's a fantastic time to be a woman in the workplace. And there are any number of factors that I think really drive that, and I've listed them here. Many of these are not new for you, but I really believe that some of the technologies that we have available to us today that are so cutting edge really increase access for women, and not just in the US, but globally. I also know, and you guys know this, that some of the changing social dynamics have also opened up opportunity, creating avenues and windows and doors for us that, 20, 30, 50 years ago when my mother was in the workforce, that she didn't have available to her. And also access to education, I think, has been really instrumental in giving women access to a more level playing field. We still have a ways to go, but there are all sorts of things that we're able to do today that we weren't able to do even 50 years ago. And of course, then there are political and even legislative influences, I think, that really continue to reinforce that women have significant, relevant, and profitable contributions as it relates to business. So again, I really do believe that it's a great time for women to be in business. But here's another thing that I think is really fascinating, and it's this. Companies are doing more and more to understand how to attract and hire and retain female talent. And some are even going as far as designing programs that stay in contact with their female talent that are leaving. Some are leaving to go to different types of opportunities, which we'll talk about in a second. Some are opting to take on full-time caregiving responsibilities and growing their families. Some are opting to travel and extend their education. Companies like Ernst & Young, some of the legal firms like Ogletree and Deakins, and more are doing things to really design efforts to understand what women need and reaching out to women and creating opportunities from them from what they learn. So it's an important observation, I think, to be able to say that it's a great time to be a woman in business. And with that, I really want to make a case for why it's so awesome and important to invest in women. So just a couple of bullets that I want to share with you, and there's tons of collateral out there that talks about and builds a case for investing in women, but I just want to share a couple of anecdotes with you. So, and depending on which survey and which white paper you take a look at, these statistics vary a little bit. But by and large, today, women occupy about half of all managerial and professional positions in the US. That's huge. And that includes management jobs. It accounts for about 60% of accounting and auditing roles. That's huge. So the idea that women have opportunity in leadership positions, I mean, is really right in our face. And more, we're doing great work around capturing the data around this. So it's not just anecdotal, but we're actually beginning to measure this. And I love this next one, and that's this, that simply by reducing the attrition of women by just 1/4, we add back about 220,000 jobs to the workforce. And for those of us that are doing hiring and talent acquisition and talent development, that's huge. And particularly in the STEM fields, this becomes particularly important when we're trying to recruit women in technology and engineering and science. And then for those of us that are moving towards measurement and financials and operations, this is a particularly juicy tidbit, and it's this, that the companies, the Fortune 500 firms that are aggressively promoting women have about 34% higher industry medians in their profits and revenues. That's huge. So I really believe that the case for investing in women is already made. The fact that we have opportunity out there and that it's really ours for the taking, I think is really what we need to be talking more about in industry. So now I want to share with you a little snippet. And we've talked about some of the awesome things that are available to us as women, but what are some of the challenges? I'm going to take a moment and share this video with you, and I hope it gives you something to think about. I'm just going to let this show. Kate, I'm just going to ask, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it. So you are good to go. Yeah, Karen is just loading, sharing her screen so we're able to see this video, and then we'll go back to the main program. So yeah, go ahead.
Awesome. Here we go. We've all heard that on average, women in the U.S. only earn about 70% as much as men. However, that number reflects the fact that fewer women are employed in higher-paying technical and management jobs. When you look at men and women who actually perform the same work, the number is closer to 97%. What's most surprising is that even when women seem to be offered the same opportunities as men within their organizations, the pay gap appears to widen dramatically as women are promoted. From a very close 2.2% gap in individual contributor jobs to 5% or higher for directors and executives. The gender pay gap is also apparent for women who prioritize home and family life over work. Single men and women who always put their careers first see no pay gap at all. But as you increase the requests for family over work, even for single people, the pay gap starts to rear its ugly head. By the time you get to comparing married mothers and married fathers, the financial penalties for the same choices are significantly higher for women. Great. So now I've got a question for you. Your left-hand corner where Kate shared that you can respond in the chat box, I'd like you to answer this question. Based on what you just saw in that video, how do you think women respond? How do you think women respond to this issue around pay? Share your thoughts now. All right, anybody have thoughts? Karina says they are blown away. Sydney says women don't usually do anything, they just accept it. Very interesting. Janelle says, I don't think women are actually aware that this is going on. And if they are, they probably don't voice it in fear of losing their jobs. That's fascinating. Yeah. Anybody else? So it would be fair to say that with this pay disparity that's getting so much media coverage right now, it would be fair to say that women may leave, right? That'd be a fair assumption that they leave those jobs where they feel like they're not getting paid, they stay quiet about it, that they're frustrated. But I want to share something with you. This is a really interesting snapshot of what happens, and this is specific to the SET workforce, and that's science, engineering, and technology. So if you look at the column on the left, you'll see when women are leaving the private SET workforce, 49% of them leave those jobs and use their training. So they go and they start their own companies, or they go into organizations that have been startups. They're designated as startups, or they go to work in the government. But 51% of them on the right side are going into non-SET jobs. So they're leaving science, engineering, and technology altogether. And 20% of them are just leaving the workforce altogether. And then some of them are staying in the same company, but leaving science, engineering, and technology. So that's huge. There's huge impact and implication for the science, engineering, and technology field. And I'm just curious, have any of you heard this type of feedback that women are frustrated and so they're leaving? And if so, share in the chat box a scenario or an experience that maybe you had around why talented women leave companies. Take a moment and share your thoughts now. Okay, Jordan says, I think women are shocked about how the gap is so dependent on different variables such as marriage and family life, especially in comparison to men in the same position. That's absolutely right. Even in the 21st century, there's so many of us that find this very, very surprising, but it's true. So there's something interesting that's come out of my research in this topic, and it's this. You know, we saw that video that talked about pay disparities, and we looked at some of the reasons why women are leaving and what they're doing with their education and experience. But here's what we are discovering more and more. And I just find this fascinating. In fact, the driving forces in large part are actually not financial. Some of the drivers are financial. And yes, there's a huge awareness around what the disparities are. But more and more women, and so many of the women that I work with in my client organizations and in my private practice, cite these things that I've listed here. Some of the things that are driving women to leave and to abandon even leadership roles are a lack of accessible role models. I'm really curious about what you guys think about this, so feel free to comment in the chat box. The executive commitment isn't scalable. That means you may have one or two leaders who are really gung-ho, maybe somebody at the top level of the organization. But as you move further down the food chain, so to speak, it can be very, very difficult to get executive sponsorship and executive commitment around developing leaders. And then ingrained belief systems, even within the female population, that there are belief systems about what women are willing to do, what kinds of work women can do. And we see this talked about all the time, right? And then this age-old one that we just alluded to, and that's the penalties for work-life balance, either direct or indirect. So, you know, maybe you're a single person, but maybe you're really, really family-oriented, you know, or maybe you want to travel with your partner. There are all sorts of things that impact that work-life balance sort of thing that I think really do drive some of the reasons why women end up leaving. And then finally, the existing development is really focused on director level and above. And I know this to be true because throughout my career, one of the things that I've been super focused on is building mentoring and development programs within organizations to focus on all employees, not just director level and above. And it is true that so many development programs within organizations, particularly larger organizations, are focused on really the director level and above. But I think there's something really to be said that there's this amazing source of talent that we're not tapping into for many of us as organizations that are below the director line. I mean, if you think about it, really, how are women, or how are anybody in the workforce supposed to be prepared if they're not getting that preparation before they get to that director level? So just very, very, very interesting dynamic there. So now I want to share with you this nugget that I told you that I discovered quite by surprise in a survey that I did in 2014, and it was a women's skill development survey. And I asked this question around what applies to your current path to management. In other words, what's your desire around going into leadership, right? When I left college, and even when I left high school, I remember thinking, okay, I'm ready to run the world. And I think many of you probably feel the same way, but it can be so overwhelming. And what we discovered in the survey of 156 women across the country, all demographics, all industries represented, was this. The majority of survey respondents were not in management or senior leadership, and they were okay with it. They actually didn't want to be in management or senior leadership. Wait, what? I thought that everybody wanted to run the world, right? Isn't that what we talk about a lot? And I'm sure that a lot of you feel that pressure. You feel it from, you know, maybe your schools, from your family, you know, to go out and make a lot of money and become president, or become president of a company, or start your own business. So there's a ton of pressure around that. But this challenges a little bit this idea that women are not necessarily given opportunity. And it really kind of positions this idea that there are a fair number of women, and this is just a snapshot, but we see this more and more, and you'll see it in the literature that's available now, that there are plenty of women who want to be engaged in the workforce who maybe are not ready for leadership or don't want leadership or who have other things that they want to be doing. Um, let's see, Janelle says, I believe all of these things drive women to leave more than the financial issue because a lot of people choose their work or their jobs based on what they love to do, not what pays them the most. And I think this is a very good point, Janelle, because I think this happens more and more with the generations that came after me, that they really are wanting more of a quality of life. I think so many of the student population have seen their parents and grandparents burning the midnight oil, traveling all of the time, and they're really beginning to understand. I say that the generations that came after me are probably the smarter generations, because you guys are really embracing this idea that leadership is not the only path. It is definitely a path, but it's not the only one. Jarena says, companies don't promote work-life balance. Most like to think that they do in theory, ouch, but in really, they want you to make a choice. Okay, you guys are getting the brilliant awards for this webinar. You couldn't be more right. And some of this is kind of talked about under the radar, but at the end of the day, companies want people to bring their A game. They want people to really invest in the company. But I want to give you some encouragement that more and more companies are creating options that involve work-life balance. In fact, there's a whole segment in the benefits specialization in human resources around work-life balance. And for those of you that are interested in that type of work, I really encourage you to look into that, because work-life balance is getting more and more on the radar screen for executive teams, for decision makers in the HR suite, and even at the board level. All right, so let's answer this question, and it's this: does being a woman in leadership really matter? And based on what we heard just a second ago, there are definitely concerns and challenges to being a woman, and being a woman in leadership can present its fair amount of challenges. But I really believe, and again, this is just my perspective, but I believe that moreover, in each of these areas that I've listed here, that more and more the answer is maybe. It's not a definitive yes or a no. Around compensation, the question of whether or not being a woman matters, I think, is maybe. In some areas, it is definitely a yes, that it does matter, that there are huge pay disparities. But I want to just share a little bit from my own experience. So in one of my former lives, I was brought in as the right hand to the person who was running HR, an amazing leader, somebody that I consider a mentor and a friend to this day. And shortly after I came in, she left for another opportunity, but I was brought in at a very different pay level, significantly below where my former leader had been. I was excited to have the opportunity. It was a new type of role for me, so I just took it very gladly. I was very, very grateful for the opportunity. But as I got into the role and really understood what the role entailed, I literally looked at the job description, and line for line, the job description for my former leader was exactly what it was I was doing, but for significantly less. Now, I could have taken the perspective that, men are the enemy and women are getting paid so much less, and, kind of taken the victim role. But instead, what I chose to do was I chose to have a strategic conversation with the person to whom I reported. And what I mean by that is I decided to take a look at what the business drivers were for why I was doing the kind of work I was doing, and why it made sense for me to be positioned on par to my peers, all of whom, incidentally, happen to be male. I did not make it about a female-male conversation, but I made it about what was best for the business and what were the strategic objectives and the opportunities from a business driver perspective for why I needed and the business needed and benefited from having me on par with my male counterparts. And you know what happened? Something surprising. It blew even me away. I went into the conversation with that strategic lens, and I got exactly what I asked for. That's right. I got exactly what I asked for. So there was no posturing, well, we don't know if you're actually qualified. I had the right type of conversation. I had the right type of mindset. And I really learned something very, very important from that. And I hope that that's a takeaway from you, that in the area of compensation, just as an example, being a woman may matter. It depends on your industry. It depends on who your leaders are, all sorts of things. But I think moreover, and particularly in some of the more innovative industries like science, engineering, and technology, that model of paying women less is changing, and where it's not changing, it's being challenged. So in the area of challenging work and strategic contributions, again, I've had an amazing career because there were things I was willing to do, doing things like taking on assignments that no one else wanted to take on, really understanding the business, not just my particular specialty, that gave me opportunity to do very challenging work, complex work, and even international work, where some of my peers were not doing those types of roles and responsibilities. Same thing with promotion and leadership opportunities. We heard this idea that, if you're willing to sacrifice some things. This goes into the opportunities and cost discussion. There are plenty of opportunities available for you. But again, I think sometimes we have to go into it with the ask, understanding what's it going to take for me to get promoted, and to understand what leadership values within the organizations with which you're interested in going to work for. Recognition, mentoring, and development, same thing. Now, I will say this. I saw a very interesting piece of work a couple of years ago that alluded to the fact that some executive leaders, and when I say executives, I mean at the C-suite, so executive director, VP, SVP, and above, many of them, many of whom were men, did indicate that they really are not always wired to reach back and to develop women. Some are. I can tell you that the president of Coke is super passionate about investing in women and reaching back and being very, very intentional. They have an amazing commitment to developing women. It's part of their core business strategy, and it's fascinating. There are more companies doing that. But there is some evidence that suggests that the development of female talent has to be brought to the table. And frankly, I think that's a conversation that as women, we need to lead. And then around the area of personal life, again, I think it has to do with evaluating in terms of what you want, what it is that's most important for you at any given moment. So the feedback keeps coming in. Janelle says that's definitely a takeaway for everyone. A lot of women leave or are very timid and don't want to voice that they're being treated unfairly. If you speak up, you benefit either way. And I really do think that's very, very important. And I'll just add on to that, or really just restate that I think a huge piece of it has to do with not just what you say, but how you position it. And, people always say to me, particularly as an executive coach, Karen, I need to figure out how to have this conversation. And that's an important thing to do. Having a supportive network, having somebody to bounce ideas off of, to make sure that you're not just driving it from the perspective of, hey, I'm a woman and you're a man, but really what's in the best interest of the business is so, so important. So then my next topic is, what does it take to get to leadership, right? This is really what you want to know. And I'm gonna compartmentalize it into 4 buckets. The first of which is this: know thyself. Know what your strengths are. Know what your developmental areas are. These are the things that you're not good at. Know your personality traits. We all know those people who manage people and probably shouldn't. But that's not to say that people can't grow and develop and change. But I do think it's important to understand the next item, which is the E factors. These are the things that excite you and exhaust you. And then know what your core values are. There's nothing worse than going into a role and taking something that goes completely against what you stand for, what you believe in. I do think it's important to connect to what you're passionate about, but I think it's more important to connect to organizations and roles that reflect your ability to operate in your core values. And then identify what your productive personal brand is. My team and I are finishing the final drafts for our e-course on productive personal branding. I'm super excited about it. And Kate and I have been talking a little bit about how we might be able to share some of that content with 21st century leaders. but really understand how it is you show up, and how it is other people experience you, as Dr. Kim Harris, who's one of my mentors, always talks about. The second thing is build authentic relationships. And this couldn't be more important, particularly for the students that are part of this amazing organization. As you go into organizations and think about what you want to be doing, build authentic relationships. I get this question a lot. People will walk up to me and they'll say, hey, listen, Karen, hey, I loved your presentation. Let's do lunch. Well, that sounds great, but I sometimes get frustrated hearing that because I haven't yet heard that last item, which is connecting the dots. And I want to encourage all of you, as you begin to build your networks and reach out to people on LinkedIn, it's important to help people connect the dots. Ask questions, listen well, keep your promises. But then when you're asking for those connections, go so far as to say, hey, Karen, I loved your presentation on women in leadership. I'm considering an internship opportunity and I'd love your thoughts. Would you be willing to have coffee with me? You have helped me connect the dots and understand how I can help you. And that really helps me make the best use of my time, and you as well. The next thing is know the issues. Whether you are new in your career or you're seasoned in your career, it's important for you to understand the issues as you move towards leadership. Your organization will begin to pay attention to the contributions you make when you step outside of your technical acumen, what you're good at doing, kind of driving in your lane, so to speak, and you really understand the broader implications of what's happening in the organization and what's happening in the industry. And then enjoy the journey. So many times when I have conducted interviews, I'll ask the question, so where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years? And here's what I hear. I want your job. And it sounds like you're being funny and kind of quick-witted, but it can actually be a little on the annoying side, because there's something important about building a body of experience. There are plenty of roles, and I've taken them where I had no clue what I was doing. I took the opportunity, or I applied for the role because I was excited about doing it. But I do think there's something important to be said about building a body of experience that gives you credibility, and yes, even gives you exposure and helps you kind of earn some stripes and see some things that you may need when you get to leadership. So, I encourage you to just enjoy the journey of taking positions that will give you that base of experience. And then always, I say, volunteer and take on additional responsibility. I can't tell you how often I have raised my hand to take on additional responsibility, but I think there's something to be said for the old statement that says deliver and then over deliver. So make sure you're nailing the job that you're doing and that you understand the roles and responsibilities. And then, sure, raise your hand and volunteer to take on additional responsibilities. And if you don't find it within your current organization, whether you're volunteering or otherwise, don't hesitate to look outside of your organizations to take on volunteer or additional responsibilities. So then what's the next thing to do? I know you're just dying to hear that, and it's this. I encourage you to remember that regardless of where you are in your career, whether you're just starting out, you're getting ready to leave high school and going into college, thinking about internship opportunities, or maybe you're getting ready to graduate, or even you've already entered the workforce, remember this. Your career is less about you and more about the contribution that you're making to your local community, your organization, and even the global community. When you approach your work and your career with that perspective, you will become the kind of leader that can thrive and be an amazing contribution in any environment. And then what's beyond that? And I'll tell you.
Hey, Karen, looks like you cut out just a little bit there. Do you mind repeating that?
Oh, yeah. Let's see.
Just right after the career is less about you and more about, and then from there, please.
Yeah, your career is less about you and more about the contribution that you're making to your local community, your organizations, and even the global community. And when you take that perspective, you will become the kind of leader that organizations want. Even if you are not currently in leadership, Companies, decision makers, executives, talent leaders, all pay attention to those sorts of things. So it's not just about the technical acumen, but it's really about having a mindset that makes you a strong contributor, not just someone who's in charge. And then this is the piece that I will share just a little bit of my own story. And it's this, that, when I started my career, when I left college, I had eyes to run the world. I wanted to be in charge of everything I could. I wanted to make lots of money. But I can tell you today, that as I sit here as a mom and a wife and a daughter, that the goals and objectives that I have today are much different than when I started. And the same will be true for you. You will go through seasons in your career where leadership may be absolutely what you want to be doing or what you should be doing. And then you may go through seasons where leadership is not at all what you want to be doing or at all what you need to be doing. My advice to you is this: to be open, to be in a posture of learning and contribution. And when you do that, regardless of where you are in your career, you'll be ready to lead, whether you have a formal title or not. So that's my presentation and my feedback to you. I'm going to hand it back over to Kate.
Thank you so much, Karen, for that wonderful webinar. I know as a woman in the workforce and in leadership roles, it's a great takeaway for me, and I know for all of our students here on the webinar today. So thank you so much for your work and time and expertise on this topic. And I think you really just nailed a lot of issues, that we talk with our students about, and talking about leadership in general, that it's, leadership isn't just, the top of the company or, the senior vice president. You can be a leader among any corporation or company you work for. It don't necessarily have to be that high leadership role. You can still take on leadership opportunities and being the leader within that company in other ways. So I think you definitely hit the mark on a lot of those things. And I think just for our students to kind of take away, as many of you will be attending our Summer Leadership Institutes, some of the relationships you touched about, building those relationships. I thought that was a great takeaway on how to really connect with the professionals that you meet this summer, connect those dots with them afterwards when you're following up, as Karen had mentioned. Don't just say, oh, I'm interested in internship. Do you have any openings? Well, really connect the dots and explain to them what you're looking for and how they may help you. So I thought that, that really comes at a perfect time for many of our students this summer. So
yeah, can I just...
Sure.
I'm so sorry, Kate. I just want to just follow up on that comment. So again, as someone who's hired, thousands of people throughout my career, one of the things that will impact your ability to be compelling to someone who's hiring is saying, when they ask you the question, well, tell me a little bit about what you want to do, responding with the answer, oh, I'll do anything. That is absolutely the wrong answer. And so, as we say, there are no wrong answers. That's a wrong answer. I think it is very, very important for leaders to hear very specifically what it is you want to do. Now, does that mean you only apply to one position? Absolutely not. I do encourage students to apply to areas of interest, even if it's not something you'll do over the long term. But what I do think is important is making sure that you do your homework with the organization, understanding what they do, who their leaders are, what their business models are. And all of those things are very, very important and absolutely set you apart as a candidate to pay attention to. And one final thing that I did not mention, Kate, if you'll just allow me just a little bit of latitude here.
Sure.
At the back of the presentation, I have a couple of guides that I've shared with you. We'll call it the toolkit, that will give you some very specific feedback on how to do things like know thyself. What does that actually look like? And then how to answer questions with your PBS. That is not peanut butter sandwich. That is personal brand statement. So these are some of the things that you should be ready to answer when asked. And then some feedback on getting comfortable with networking that I hope will be very helpful for you, and a little more specific than just, go to a networking event.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll share these slides with you, everyone, after the presentation. And we'll also have this up on our YouTube channel so you guys can look back and reference the webinar moving forward and for any friends or fellow peers that you might be interested in hearing this webinar, we'll certainly have it up there that you can forward to them as well. So one question we had come through, I just wanted to, if you have some time, Karen, just for a couple of minutes to answer some questions. Yeah. Were there any specific instances when you're starting your career that they asked about how you overcame some challenges in reaching some leadership roles within companies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a really broad question, but I do have at least one experience that was pivotal for me. I was still fairly new to human resources. I was in a role, working in benefits, and it was a high volume department. So I was processing a lot of paperwork and, getting to work very early, leaving very late. But there were some specific areas of human resources that I was interested in. And because I was dealing with benefits and things like family medical leave and employee relations and that sort of thing, there were some very specific areas of human resources that I wanted to do more and I wanted to learn more about. And so I asked my supervisor, now mind you, I was pumping through an incredible volume of work. I had always gotten really good reviews. And so I'd asked my supervisor for some development opportunities around the areas I was interested in. And she unequivocally told me no. She didn't look at the material I presented to her, nothing. And I was just really frustrated by that. Long story short, she wouldn't even let me take off personal time to do that. Now, that was, 15 years ago. So I know a lot more now than I did then. But it really spoke to me about the fact that sometimes you have to be your own advocate. You can raise questions and ask for development opportunities, and it may not be the time. Your company may not have the resources at the moment. And it doesn't mean you should leave, but it does mean that you should remember that you are your own best advocate. If you decide at any point in time that it's time to go, that there are other opportunities and learning opportunities that you want to pursue, then it might be time for you to consider how to go about doing that. Just make sure that you do it from the perspective that you're not angry or getting back at the company, but that you're doing it because it's in your best interest.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. We had a question come through. She asked that she's planning to attend a few networking events in the near future. What advice would you give on breaking the ice and building that network at those events?
Yeah. In one of my courses, we talk very specifically about doing that. So I think it's important to understand if you're an introvert, an extrovert, or what has recently been coined an ambivert. One of the things that people assume about me is that I'm an extrovert. I was a pageant queen. I seem like I've been on stage since I was yay high to a butterfly. But in fact, I'm an introvert with extrovert tendencies. So I can make it work. I can, hold a conversation. I can speak in front of, hundreds of people, no problem. But I need time to re-energize. And so I think it's important to understand that, because that will give you a good indicator of how or what strategies you'll be successful with when you network. For example, if you're an introvert and you go to a huge networking event and you don't know anybody, you may be tempted to stand in the corner. Well, that doesn't actually qualify as networking, right? That just means you're going to a meeting. So what I would say is determine whether or not you're an extrovert or an introvert, and then develop some strategies to work in that environment. So if you're an introvert, maybe set a goal for yourself to just simply introduce yourself to one or two people. Don't make it, 7 people. Say 1 or 2 people just to start with. And then remember to do things like make sure that you are aware of your physical presence. So instead of looking down at your phone, look up and smile. Maybe get there a little bit early. If you're an extrovert, sometimes extroverts can be very overwhelming. So one strategy when you go to a networking event might be to let the other person that you're meeting do more of the talking. And the way to do that is to ask more questions than you answer. So I think there are ways to get comfortable with networking, but I absolutely encourage you to do exactly that. Go to those networking events Ask people questions about what their experiences are, what they do. And in fact, I share some of that in this slide number 17 on getting comfortable with networking.
Great. And kind of a follow-up question of that from one of our students from Valdosta. I know we'll be certainly having a lot of networking events this summer at our programs, but she specifically asked if there are any kind of networking events for women that you might suggest, or even websites that go to learn more kind of about, where to attend some of those networking events, whether it is for high school students or beyond.
Yeah, so really good question. One of the things that I encourage people to do, particularly students, is to attend the networking events of the industry associations that you're interested in. So, for example, somebody mentioned that they were interested in human resources. I encourage you to attend some of the leadership events for SHRM Atlanta. SHRM is the Society for Human Resource Management. I'm on the volunteer leadership team, and we're always excited to get students. And many of the colleges and universities have student chapters for SHRM Atlanta. So whether it's human resources or technology, do an internet search for networking events in your industry of interest, or your functional specialty, and go to those networking events. Call the organizations and ask them if they have student memberships, or some of those types of affinity groups will offer memberships at discounted prices and even free. So I encourage you to do that, because that gives you a great insight and exposure into what those industry associations and professionals are talking about, what's most important, what's not important. And it gives you just great exposure. So I really encourage that.
Great. Thank you, Karen. Another question comes from Jordan, kind of back on, different personality traits, but in relation to an introvert, what are some ways that you can energize yourself at work, especially when working in a collaborative role?
Oh, that's a good one. We need a whole session just on that. One of the ways that I had to learn about myself was setting expectations, clarifying what my team and my leader need at the beginning of the day or the beginning of the week is super important. I get very exhausted by people constantly dropping by my desk. And that is typical for an introvert, right? Because extroverts, they don't mind talking, they want to chat, they want to find out what's going on, they want to share ideas. Introverts need time to work, they need time to think. And so if you take time to clarify with your leader or with your team, hey guys, I'm going to really be spending some time working on this project this week. Is there anything that you might need from me that I can make sure I get to you? I'll check back in, say on Wednesday or Thursday, but if you need something, just go ahead and shoot me an email. I think clarity is one of the big things, particularly as it relates to communication, that can help introverts survive. I also think it's important to make sure that you have a healthy perspective. And in my coaching practice, my tagline is focus, purpose, and perspective. And perspective are the anchors, the things that really help you stay focused and stay connected to your purpose. So perspective might be things like, what kinds of music are you listening to? What's your faith orientation, if you have one? How are you connecting to those things and integrating them into your everyday work? Those can be huge for an introvert. Hey, can you hear me?
Oh, I had my microphone on mute. Okay, so I just think we have time for one or two more questions. So I'll allow a few more to come in. If anyone has any additional questions they want to ask Karen before we wrap up at 7 here. But one that did come in, I wanted to kind of talk about, you went over a lot of different kind of what are the costs, the pay gap, when it matters to be a woman, when it doesn't. And I know you specifically asked about, it's really our job to kind of start the conversation and start having that.
Mhm.
The question was really kind of, are there ways to actively, what kind of action items that women can do as they're entering the workforce to really change the mindset moving forward? What are some things that we can actively pursue, besides just having that kind of conversation?
Yeah.
Or some other things that we should, these young women, as they're approaching those leadership roles, that they can really take on?
Yeah, really good question. So I think that one of the most important things you can do, if you don't remember anything else I say today, remember this. You remember the slide where I said, know the issues? When you're going into an organization or when you're getting ready to accept a role, I think doing your homework is so important. I think, gotten more opportunity just because I was willing to do the work. Before you step into anybody's interview, before you accept any opportunity or apply for any position, you should absolutely do your homework. That includes all of the things I mentioned earlier, knowing, being familiar with the industry, uh, making sure that you understand the organization itself. What are the drivers of financial success for the organization, right? What drives revenue? What are the cost centers? What are the profit centers? All of those are incredibly important before you go into having conversations about compensation, because when you have that information, you can have intelligent, business driven conversations. You will shut down a conversation about your pay quicker by taking kind of an antagonistic position, saying, well, I'm a woman and everybody else in here is a man. I have navigated several of those conversations on behalf of my senior leadership team. And one in particular, I'll just share really quickly. There was a woman who had been at the company a very long time. She was angry for all sorts of reasons. But one of the bones that she had to pick was she felt like it was a male-oriented organization, and that was the main driver for her compensation. What she didn't realize after I went and actually pulled the data was that she was being paid about 15% more than her male counterparts. But it was her anger and kind of frustration with her work that was really driving and coloring her perception. So I can't tell you enough to make sure that you're able to have a conversation that's driven by business objectives, business issues, and not just the male-female component.
Great advice. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, I think listen, that's kind of all the time we have. If you have any additional questions for Karen, that you begin to think about later after the presentation, I know it's a lot of information to digest, and I'm sure a lot of questions will come up afterwards. So I encourage you to connect with her on LinkedIn. I'm sure she's on there and willing to connect and answer any additional questions, or I'm happy, you can certainly email me, kate@21stcenturyleaders.org, and I'd be happy to forward those questions on to Karen as well. So,
and if you connect with me on LinkedIn, sorry, just make sure you let me know you're from 21st Century Leaders. That would be great.
So on behalf of 21st Century Leaders, Karen, we just want to thank you so much for your time and expertise on this subject. It was very enjoyable and very thought-provoking for all of us. So we really appreciate you taking the time to work with us and provide us this insight. So thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, everybody.